Well, hello and welcome back. This is Jennifer McGuire, and I hope you're having a wonderful week. So, today I'm sharing with you one of my favorite types of cards to make, and that is a see through card. I've done many videos in the past with this technique, but today I'm doing a different spin by creating my see through cards with die cuts. Now, I will link up here and in my description below to a few other see through card videos, so be sure to check those out. But today is all about die cut layering. And since layering die sets are becoming more popular, I'll start out with a technique that I like to do to make sure that I line my die cuts up perfectly. Hopefully it'll be helpful to you too. And if you don't have any layering die sets, don't worry. I will also share an idea for how to get a layered look from a regular die. Okay, let's start with this example here. I'm using the new Altenew Virginia Rose die set. So what I did is I had all these dies ready to go, but I wanted to organize them. So I got a piece of magnetic paper, and that's the black piece that you see there, and I put all the dies on that paper. Then I traced each of the dies onto the background with a black permanent pen. And I put a little code on the dies that layer together. So those are A1, A2, A3, and I know that those three layer together to create the large flower. And then over on the top right, I have B1, B2, and B3, which layer for the other flower. I like to trace them on the black magnetic sheet so I know where to put them back and make sure I don't let any of them go missing. I also have the guide for layering here that I cut out from the packaging. It's very helpful to keep this, but if you didn't, you can always find the guides on the website for the company. Okay, so let's start out by layering one of the large flowers. Then I will share a tip for how to make this easier. When layering any die cuts, I find it best to orient your die cuts at the same angle or the same position as the guide. That way you don't have to spin it around and figure it out. So here I can easily place these two together by following the guide. I'm using Gina K Connect adhesive. This is a very strong liquid adhesive that I really like for layered die cuts, but I'll show some other options throughout the video. One option that I didn't include in the video is to use Stick-It double-sided adhesive. You put that on your cardstock before you die cut, and that puts adhesive on the back automatically. That definitely is a great option, which I've shown many times in videos, but today I stuck with liquid and spray adhesives. And this spray adhesive that you see over to the side, I'll show you how to use that later. But I did want to mention that's another option for layering these die cuts. Okay, now I still have the center of my flower to go, but I wanted to show you a trick. I had a bunch of these flowers to put together, and I wanted to save some time. So this is the technique that I came up with, and it really is helpful. So I used the 3-layer dies to cut from some scrap pieces of cardstock. We need the negative space for this. I'm taking the solid-most layer, the first layer of our dies, and taping it onto my work surface. I find it helpful to keep it still, and I'm using some purple tape to do this, but any tape would work. Now I have my layered die cut that I've already assembled. So this is the one I just showed you. I popped it in place. Now I'm taking the negative space for the second layer and lining it up with that second layer on my die cut. So you see how I lined it up there? I'm then putting tape on one side, so just on this one side here, which will create a hinge that allows me to flap it open and then put it back down. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing with the third layer. So I'm lining it up with my die cut, so you can see me line it up here, putting tape on another side of that one. That will create a hinge for that one, and I'll flap that back. And now we can use this as a guide for layering all of our other die cuts. So I put the solid piece in first. Now I'm putting liquid adhesive on the second. I've got that flap down. I line it up, press it down, then lift up that flap. Now I have my third layering piece. I can close that flap down, put the liquid adhesive on the back of this, and pop it into place. You can see how this was much faster than layering the die cuts individually. So I plan to do this anytime I have a bunch of flowers or a bunch of layered die cuts to assemble. It's really helpful, and I can save these pieces in my die packaging so that I can use them again whenever I create a card using this set in the future. This process was very helpful to me as I made several large flowers for these cards for this video, and also for some cards I plan to do off screen. Next, let's do the little flower blossom. I already die cut our little flaps, and I also die cut the first base and glued on the second layer, so that's what you see there. I'm popping it into the negative space, lining up the negative space for this second layer. So I'm going to line that up there. I'll put some tape on one of the edges, and this will act as a little hinge that we can flip up. Now I'm going to glue the third layer on. I'll put that right onto our layered die cut there, and then we can line up our third flap. So when you're doing this technique, you only have to layer the die cuts once by hand, then you can form these flaps, and then you can assemble them all using those flaps. Okay, so let's go ahead and do one of these just so you can see it in action. I put in the first base. Now I'm putting glue on the second layer. I've got that flap down. Pop it in place. Then flip the third flap over. Put glue on the third layer and line that up. And then we have our layered flower, and it really comes together very quickly. Now that I've created all my flowers, it's time to create the center of the large flowers. I have a Post-it note that has the sticky side facing up, and I've placed lots of the little inside pieces on it, so it holds still as I added color. I wanted like this soft brown color, couldn't find the perfect cardstock, so I just die cut it from yellow and then changed the color with a Copic marker. So I added these little layered pieces to the center. I didn't do that flap technique for this because it was really easy to get the right placement. So now I have all my pieces, including a bunch of leaves that are included in that die set. Okay, now it's time to create that see-through card design, and this is really easier than you think. So just stick with me because I promise it'll make sense in the end. I have a white piece of cardstock that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm just using that as a guide. So it's just laying there on my desk. On it, I'm arranging a bunch of flowers and leaves, and we want these to be close together and overlapping. I am not gluing these down. They're just laying there, laying on the white cardstock. And I'm trying to cover as much of that white cardstock as possible, all the way up to the edge. So this is the name of the game. All you got to do is arrange them to overlap quite a bit. Notice that I'm starting at the top of the white cardstock and working my way down, just to make sure I don't end up with any empty spaces in the middle where nothing's connected. Also, again, be sure that your die cuts hang off the edge quite a bit. That gives it a nice defined edge when we go ahead and cut this. So I continue to do this, arrange flowers as however I want, making sure that the leaves overlap and connect the different pieces together. The more overlapping you have, the better this card will turn out. Once I've covered the entire white piece, remember there was no glue used at all, I'm going to carefully put a piece of press and seal on it to attach them all together. This is Press and Seal. It's a product that's meant for the kitchen, but since I don't cook, might as well use it in the craft room. And basically, you can lay it over something and then press it, and it holds it in place. It sticks to it. So I've got a piece I'm going to lay down, press it down carefully, not letting any of the die cuts move, and it sticks to all of those die cuts. And you want to push your fingers around to make sure it grabs a hold of every one. If you do not have Press and Seal, you can use a piece of masking paper for this, and I'll show that in a future example in this video. Now I'm going to flip this over and cut off anything that was hanging off that white cardstock. So that will help me to trim this down to the perfect size for the front of a card. After I've done this, I can remove that white cardstock because remember it was just a guide. Now I need to make sure that all of these die cuts stay assembled. So here's the back here. This is a little trick I like to do. I like to take the largest die cuts that I've assembled, which happens to be the large flowers, die cut another of that shape, not the layer, just the outline or the solid first layer, and glue that onto the back. That way I'm sandwiching the die cuts between it, so it helps to keep them connected. You do not need to do this, but I do think it's best to go and add a little bit of adhesive here and there so it's all connected nicely. So there's what my back looks like now with those extra die cuts. Now I can trim off once again the excess that's hanging off from those added die cuts that we put on the back. Then when we're done with that, all we have to do is carefully remove the press and seal. And check it out, we have a card front that is see-through and it's all connected with die cuts. Definitely worth the time and effort because it's something extra special. Okay, now it's time to turn this into a card. Now I'm going to create a tri-fold card so that we have a place to write a personal message that you won't see through on the front of the card. So here I have first a top folding note card that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, what I typically use for my cards. I'm going to trim this so that there is a little flap that's a little more than 1/4 of an inch. Really, it doesn't matter how big this is. Now on this flap, I'm going to glue our card front. So I'm putting some liquid adhesive on here. It really doesn't matter what type of adhesive you use here. Just make sure it's super strong. Double-sided tape would work too. Now I'm putting our see-through card front onto that, lining it up at the top. And there we've created a card where the front is see-through. However, I want to put a message on the inside, so I'm adding that tri-fold feature. So I have another top folding note card that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I'm going to glue these together. I'm using liquid adhesive here. You don't need much for this. I've never had any problems with warping or buckling when using liquid adhesive with my cardstock because my cardstock is nice and heavyweight. I like to use 110-pound cardstock. So I glued the backs together, and now we have that tri-fold card in the inside, so we can hide our message. Let's finish the front of the card. I created a sentiment strip from the Altenew Sentiment Strips stamp set. And I also added 3 pieces of thin cardstock behind that so I could get some nice dimension behind it. I like to use that instead of foam tape because it's a little bit stronger. I glued that onto the front of our card, and now I want a sentiment on the inside in the exact same position so it doesn't show through. To do this, I'm using my MISTI stamping tool. I'm lining up another sentiment, just setting it on top of the Praying For You sentiment. Sorry, my head got in the way there. Put it right on top, close the door of the MISTI. Now I'm opening the card, and I'll stamp it here. That way I can be sure that this sentiment is hidden exactly behind the one on the outside. So here is a look at the final card. You can see how we have lots of layered die cuts and that you can see through the front of the card to the inside. When you open the card, there's an additional message, and then you can open again for a more personal message there. This took a bit of time. It took me probably an hour, hour and a half to make this card, but it's an extra special card going to someone who really needs some prayers. So I thought it was definitely worth the effort. And yep, you can still stand this card up so they can put it on display if they want. Okay, here is another card example using some of my leftover flowers. And this time, instead of making the card completely see-through, I made it so there's vellum that allows the inside to show. But you could keep it see-through if you wanted to. This time I'm using the new Altenew Dainty Blooms die. This is such a beautiful die, and I cut it from white cardstock. And now I'm spraying spray adhesive on the back. I'm doing this in a box to keep everything clean, but honestly I usually go outside to spray this. I don't like using sprays in my house, so I like to be careful. I went ahead and glued that onto another of the same white die cut. This will be the front of our card, so I wanted to make sure that it was really stable. Now I have a white die cut circle. It's pretty small. Covered it with adhesive, and now I'm adding some of my die cuts on top. That circle will be hidden. It's basically just a plate on which I am assembling all of my pieces. I'm tucking a few little leaf die cuts here and there, and then I also have that additional yellow blossom. So after I have these all assembled, again, that little white circle is very helpful, we can glue that onto the front of our card. So I've put some liquid adhesive on the front center of this layered background die cut. Now I don't have to worry about getting adhesive everywhere because I will be able to add glue to it later. If you wanted to, you could keep this background completely open and see-through, but I wanted to show you that you could add vellum if you want to. So I have some Graphics Platinum vellum. I like this vellum because it's shimmery, And I'm scoring it at 5.5 inches. And then I will fold along that score line and then cut that in half. This will form 2 top folding note cards that are 4.25 by 5.5. I don't actually need a full note card, so we're going to trim part of that off and save it for a future project. So I'm keeping about a 1-inch flap on the back of this note card. That's about all you need. Okay, so now I'm going to put some spray adhesive on the back of our assembled die cut. So I'm doing the same thing I did before. And I'm going to put this onto that vellum so you can see the flap is on the back side. And I'm going to hold this here for a few minutes just to make sure that it stays put. You could use tape around the edges, and that would be enough if you wanted. So now we have our assembled card front with lots of layered die cuts. Now on the inside of that back flap, I'm putting some strong adhesive. This is Lawn Fawn double-sided tape. And I will glue that onto an upside down top folding 4.25 by 5.5 inch note card. That way we have the tri-fold feature again. I used a darker color cardstock on the inside so that it still would show through that vellum. I'm stamping a sentiment on that inside flap. Then I had this extra flower, so I decided to glue that on the inside too. So I glued it right over my sentiment, and then I stamped my sentiment again, so it would be on that flower too. So it was a continuous message. Okay, so I added a love die cut to the front. That's from an older script die set from Altenew. And here's the completed card. So when you look through the front, you can see through to the blue inside. And then when you open it up, you have the additional message and additional die cut. Then you can open it again and have a personal spot for a message. Now, if you wanted to make this more impactful, you could have skipped the vellum and just kept it open. I think I'll try that on a future card. I'm just really enjoying using that platinum vellum lately because the shimmer is just gorgeous. Okay, now it's time for a really unique card. In this case, I had one die, but I did some tricks to make it look like it was a layered die. And this one happens to be a see-through card too. So I die cut using this new Altenew die that is just so detailed. Now notice all those tiny little pieces. Those can be frustrating to get out of your die cut. So here's a time saver for you. I have a piece of craft foam on my desk just to act as a cushion. I then use my Spellbinder tool to roll across the back of the die to force all those little pieces out. Once I'm done with that, I can remove my die cut and then repeat the process to make sure I get all the little pieces out, and it saves me a ton of time. And I use my handheld vacuum to just sweep up all those excess pieces. So I repeated that process with 3 colors of die cuts, and they were all cut from the same die. However, I wanted a layered look. So here's a trick. You can always cut multiple of the same dies and then change them up or alter them a bit. I'm using circle dies and taping them onto my die cuts, just at different places, so I have different size circles I'm cutting. I'm going to run that through my die cut machine. I'm using the Gemini Junior, but any die cut machine should work. And you can see I'm cutting out little rings or circles from our pattern. They're all different sizes, so then I can glue them all together onto one die cut so that I get a layered look. So I'm spraying adhesive onto the back of this outer die. I cut the inside out with a large circle die, and I'm gluing it onto a dark green die cut. So I'm just kind of turning around until I get it lined up, and then I can press it in place. Then I have the inner ring that I added too, and now it looks like I had a layered die set, but really it was just one die, and I just altered my die cuts and layered them together for a fun layered look. This just takes a little bit of time and is definitely worth it because it's the focal point of the card. Okay, now let's create the card itself. Notice that the card is smaller than the die cut. I thought it'd be fun if the die cut hung off the edges. So I have a piece of white cardstock that is 4.25 by 4.25, and that's what you see laying on my table here. I have a white die cut that I'm centering over it. Once I have it centered, I need to mark where that top edge is so I can score the die cut there. Instead of using a pencil, I just have a piece of tape that I'm lining up right there with the top of that white square. And that way I know where to score. You could do a pencil if you prefer. Now I'm going to take this over to my scoreboard, and I have a bone folder, and I'm going to score right along the edge of that purple tape. So I'm just lining up with one of the grooves and carefully scoring there. Notice how I go back and forth just to make sure that I score nicely on this intricate die cut. Then I'm going to take my white cardstock and just tuck it in there so that I can wrap or fold over along that edge. I don't have any glue there, it just helps me to fold there. Then I can use my bone folder to really reinforce that fold. And I can remove that tape and use it for another part of my project. Okay, so now it's time to glue our colorful die cut onto that white die cut that has the fold. So I'm put glue on the back of that colorful die cut, adding it onto the white one, but making sure we don't glue down that fold. Remember, we want to keep that folded part there. So let me flip it over and you can see the white fold on the back. Okay, so now I had some adhesive that I sprayed on the back of the colorful die cut that's exposed there. So just to make sure it's not sticky, I use my anti-static powder tool on that, and that removes the stick. Now we can glue this onto our white 4 1/4 by 4 1/4 inch piece. This isn't a note card, just a piece of cardstock. So I'm folding that little white die cut folded piece. It's very delicate, but it's okay. It's all you need. Folding it over our white square, and then putting double-sided tape over it to hold it in place. I will then put double-sided tape around the other three sides, remove the release paper, and glue onto that another piece of white cardstock of the same size. That will make sure that that intricate die cut flap stays sandwiched between. So now you can see how the front of the card flips open. We needed a place to write a message on the inside that wouldn't show through. So I die cut a light blue circle and scored close to the edge. I'm putting some strong double-sided tape on the back of that little flap. This will go inside of the card and flip open to show their personal message. I could have done a trifold card design like I showed you earlier, but I wanted to show you a different design option. So the adhesive flap is facing up. I'm lining it up with the circle in the front of the card. This is just a good way to center it. And then I close the card onto it. And that'll press that adhesive on the flap onto the inside, and there we have a spot for a message. So I stamped a sentiment onto a little white circle that will add to the center. It says, "Sending happy thoughts," and that will show through from the front. Then I can always put a personal message behind that circle flap. So here's the completed card. It ends up fitting perfectly into a 6 by 6 square envelope. I'll link to the ones I like below. And I also added some white iridescent gems to the pattern, just for a little bit of sparkle. So here you can see how I open up that see-through front, and then there's a place to write a message inside. You could trim the edges off if you want to keep this a traditional card, but I like that the die cut hangs off the edges. And by the way, the sentiment is from the Altenew Weekend Doodles stamp set. This has some beautiful wreaths and floral images, but I thought that little sentiment there fit perfectly in the center of the card. Okay, we're on to our last example. This one's kind of like the first example, but I used lots of layered stars. I needed to make the perfect baby card for somebody special, and I thought this would work. Okay, so for this one, I used the Altenew Layered Stars dies. These are new. And what's cool is they positioned the dies so that they're perfectly set for layering. So if you wanted to do like a negative space technique, you could. But I'm just going to die cut a bunch of stars from 3 different shades of yellow cardstock. I'm going to assemble my see-through card front differently than I did for my first floral card example. I wanted to show you another option. In this case, I'm using Avery removable adhesive sheet. This is cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm taping it to my desk so the sticky side is facing up. This is light tack, kind of like you would have on a Post-it note. If you want to, you could instead use the press and seal, as I did earlier, or you could use any masking paper. I'm just using that stickiness to hold my stars in place as I arrange them. So I'm starting on the top in one corner, and every time I overlap my stars, I put a tiny dot of liquid adhesive. So watch, I've got this next star. I'm going to figure out where it's going to overlap with this last star I put down. Once I figure that out, I put a tiny drop of adhesive on that star. That way I can be sure they're connected. So this time I'm gluing them together as I go, being sure not to glue to that sticky piece on the background. This sticky piece is also our guide, so we know how big of a background we need to create. Now, when doing this technique, you do need to glue your die cuts down upside down, which you'll see why in a moment. But in this case, they're stars, so it really doesn't matter, but I am putting them down upside down. Each time, I'm putting a little dot of glue to overlap with the last star. You want to make sure that all of your stars overlap enough so that they stay connected. And you want to use a strong adhesive like the Gina K Connect because you don't want it to come undone when we remove that sticky paper. So I'm going to continue to do this, connecting the stars. This took me about 20 minutes, definitely worth the effort in the end. So this is helpful because you have the sticky paper that helps to hold them in place. But this time, unlike the first time, I was gluing as I went. Once I've covered the entire piece, I can go ahead and trim the excess off using some large scissors. And then we can remove that masking paper. Just make sure when you remove the masking paper that everything is dry completely so that they stay connected. So here you can see our see-through background that we've created. You can do this with pretty much any shaped dies, even small ones like this. Okay, once I'm done with that, I can go ahead and start gluing on my layers. So I have the 3 different size stars that I'm gluing together with different colors of yellow cardstock. And I'm just gluing them right on top of the stars that we created on our background. I think it'd be fun to create a background of all layered hearts or layered balloons, lots of different options for this design. Okay, after I've glued all of my layered stars on, I can go ahead and flip that piece over and cut off any of the excess layered pieces that are hanging off our original background. Now for the sentiment, I use the Altenew Welcome Home stamp set and die set. So the die set has a large circle and also the word welcome. And then I took Sweet Baby from the stamp set. I also die cut some larger stars using the Altenew Halftone Star die set, and that's the large stars you see here. I have die cut Welcome 3 times from white cardstock, and I glued those together for a layered look. Then I die cut it from glitter cardstock and glued that on top, and then added that to one of our large stars. Now for the Sweet Baby, I'm using the Altenew Obsidian Black ink, which is my new favorite black ink for sentiments. You just lightly tap your stamp, and it gives you the perfect dark, crisp black sentiment. I'm putting liquid adhesive on the back of that star and adding it to the top center. Don't worry about the adhesive oozing through to the back of that because we're going to put another star on the back to sandwich everything together. Next, I'm taking a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch top folding white note card and cutting it so that I have a tiny little flap at the folded edge. After reinforcing that with my bone folder, we're going to glue our card front onto this. So I have the back of my card front that's see-through, and I'm putting strong liquid adhesive right along the top edge. I then can position this on that tiny little flap on our note card. Now you'll notice that my background is smaller, so I'm going to have to go back and trim some of that white off. I forgot that I trimmed my background, the star background, down to 5 1/4 by 4 inches. So now after this dries, I'll just trim off that excess. I really like the Tim Holtz trimmer. This is a great trimmer and is really good for fixing mistakes like this. Now I need to go back and add a star to the inside back. I really don't have to do this, but I really like to add more stability to the backgrounds, and this adds a little bit. So I'm just going to line it up with the star that I see through onto the front. Now I have a yellow star that's going to be glued on the inside of the card. So I'm putting some adhesive on the back of this. Then I'm just going to line it up with the white star with the adhesive face up. So once I have it lined up, I'll carefully close the card onto it. Then I know my yellow star will line up perfectly on the inside. And anything I write on that yellow star won't show through when the card's closed. So I glued that card onto a background that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, just so some white trim shows around the edge. And I also added some Studio Katia glitter gems to that. So here's a closer look at all that layered die cutting, which is just so cool in real life. And when you open it up, there's a star, and on that star I can write my personal message. So you can see how cool that is to have a see-through card front. So I hope you'll give these see-through layered die cut cards a try. They're definitely worth the effort to make something extra special. If you are interested in the supplies that I use, I always link them below to multiple sources in my description below and over on my blog. And if you want to learn more about creating see-through cards, or you're looking for tips on gluing together layered die cuts, you can check out these videos I have in the middle. Thank you once again, and as always, for the time that you spend with me. I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you again soon.